This is a Geek Leader. Hey, Geek Leaders. Welcome to episode 137 of the podcast. I hope you guys have had a great start to 2020. And this episode is sponsored by Splashtop. Splashtop is the preferred remote access and remote support software. There are three main products that you can choose from depending on who you are and what you need. Splashtop Business Access for individuals and small teams. That's one of the products that I use personally and love it. Splashtop Remote Support for IT and MSPs. We also use that at our company, and it's a fantastic solution. And Splashtop SOS for support and help desk teams. Splashtop uses robust security measures, keeping your data safe and protecting all of your employees and computers that you are accessing. And you can start a free trial today, and you'll see why so many users are leaving other remote access softwares and switching to Splashtop, because you get all the same features, better performance at a fraction of the cost. And if you don't believe it, you should at least try it out. Get a free trial plus 20% off for any listeners to A Geek Leader. Just go to ageekleader.com/splashtop. Again, I've been using this software for 7 years, and from a personal standpoint and from the professional standpoint, it is fantastic. I love using it with my iPad, with my iPhone, being able to remote into Windows and Mac machines. It's a great solution, highly recommended. For 20% off and a free trial, go to ageekleader.com/splashtop. All right, Geek Leaders, today on the show, I've got Michael K. Levine, and he is the author of a book we're going to be talking about called People Over Process. And if you're from Scrum background, you probably are aware of that people over process statement. But Michael is an expert when it comes to lean and agile software development, information technology, and he's worked at some large commercial banks, which we'll talk about as we get through the show. So with all that being said, Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to talk to your audience.
Yeah, so how did you get to where you are today in your career, and exactly where are you today?
Yeah, well, right now I am the CIO for consumer lending and business banking, which is small business at U.S. Bank, and I've been there for a little over 8 years. My background is illustrative, I think, of how far this industry has come. You know, my education was actually in international economics. We only had a one credit course in computer engineering when I was in college. I did some international trade negotiation in D.C., became a commercial lender, and then I got into computers full-time in 1990, just around the time where networks were starting to grow and local area networks and the introduction of the PC, believe it or not. And I've been doing that ever since. I spent a lot of time at Norwest Banks, which became Wells Fargo, and a lot of time at First Bank System, which became U.S. Bank. And in between, I had a stint of 7 years as CTO of a software company doing multiple listing systems and software for agents and brokers.
Wow. So, yeah, I'm in Charlotte area, so Wells Fargo is right down the road. So I know a lot of people that work up there. It's interesting to hear some of the way that they work, and it's also interesting that you're talking about agility, and you've written about agility when you've kind of worked in some of these large banks. And a lot of times, you know, from the software perspective, we don't really think about agile when it comes to banking. How does that play out, and how did that come about when you started writing these books?
Yeah, I grew up in the business side, not as a computer engineer, and moved into software engineering. And so I was used to being very close to the business. And so I think I was agile before agile was invented.
Before agile was cool, huh?
When it came around, it was something I had already done of, working with the business every day and testing them as soon as it's ready, those kinds of things. But my actual formal introduction came through Lean. I owned in my group one of the larger imaging operations in the world because it was Wells Fargo's mortgage imaging, and you all know how much paper there is involved in that.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And we hired a bunch of industrial lean engineers to help us lean out the process and become more efficient. And that really taught me the basics of lean. And then I got into lean product development a little bit, and then came agile. So I've seen agile as almost an application of lean for software. And that's how I've looked at agile.
What do you think the difference is between lean and agile? Because I've seen some people give talks where they kind of intertwine, use them both for the same thing, but I know they're different. What are the differences for people that, like me, that may not be fully aware?
Yeah, there are actually there are a lot of differences and similarities. I think the biggest thing to understand is the lean that most people think about is lean for manufacturing. So that is where you have predictable processes where you can pretty reliably predict that if I do this piece of work, it'll take this long and here's the outcome. And the focus there is standardization and continuous improvement.
Kind of like the DMAIC process to figure it out.
Absolutely. And in software, that's turned into something like Kanban, right? Where you pull the work, you test it, you do the next one, and it's a very repetitive focus. It's really a flow of manufacturing. And the alternative to that is what's called lean product development, and that's how Toyota would say develop the Prius. And the way they do that is they don't have formal standard processes. They don't do a ton of continuous improvement. They don't have a formal project plan. They really focus on the leadership and how the leadership and the people work together and how do they foster creativity while still developing a car that runs great. And I think that's more like the kind of work that I do. And then Agile has elements of both. Agile has elements of repetitive manufacturing type work and also of creative type work. I think one of the biggest issues we have in our companies is we confuse the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely see that for sure. So what are some things we can do to help, not confuse the two as much?
I mean, I think first understand the difference is the most important thing. And then I think the next one is don't over standardize your teams. I think that's an error people make is a lot of people now see Scrum as synonymous with Agile, which to me that was the primary reason probably I wrote this book is I've seen people implement or try to implement Agile or to become more Agile. They think implementing Scrum is the basic idea. So we eliminate project managers, we eliminate systems analysts, and we create product owners and assistant product owners. So we change everything, and we don't need to change everything. We need to change the right things.
Yeah. I see a lot of people that they try to eat the whole fish instead of just like spitting out the bones. Keep the part that's good. And I was actually talking to someone at a conference. I was at the Content Protection Summit just this past week, and I was talking to someone there, and they mentioned that they're I asked them about, so you guys are developing your projects using Agile? And they said, no, we don't like Scrum. I was like, well, you don't have to be Scrum to be Agile. And I don't think they understood that they were separate.
I think that's really true. I actually was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and I heard someone talking from a very successful company. And she talked about how they wanted to introduce Agile. And they went into the company and tried to become product focused and introduce Scrums and product owners, et cetera. And the company basically rejected it. And the company didn't need any of that. Right? The company already worked really well. What they needed to do was take some of the great ideas and introduce them into their existing mechanisms. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very big error. So I think people fall back on Scrum as a process rather than people and interactions as the most important thing. To me, if you're going to become Agile or implement Agile, the first thing to do is think about your people. What are your people's skills? How do they lead? How are they organized? Do you have the right people? How do you teach them to lead? And that's why I wrote this book, which is, to me, that's what people should do. They should have a model of leadership that works, and they should get the right kinds of leaders and the right kinds of roles. And then let them work.
Yeah. So when you talk about people, I think people are extremely important. They're your biggest asset, right? And how is it that we can make sure we're doing the right thing as leaders for our people? Because sometimes you get caught up in the fact that, we've got a deadline, we've got projects. This is a business, and we don't really think about the people behind the business.
Yeah, I haven't seen that people kind of reject working really hard on important projects. And I haven't seen in my companies a lot of people abuse. It happens occasionally, but mostly the companies I've been in, Wells Fargo and US Bank, care about their people and treat them well. I think what we need to do as leaders is develop them to do the right kind of work. So, for example, Scrum doesn't have a role for an engineering leader for a Scrum team. It's just not something they have product owner, Scrum master, and the team.
Right.
And one of the things I learned in lean product development is this role called the chief engineer, which is the lead engineer on a team. Senior person, well-respected, skills, leadership skills. And we don't build those kinds of people. So as a leader, we should build those kinds of people. As a leader, we should teach people how to facilitate meetings effectively. We should enforce rigor. We shouldn't take answers without looking at options. So those are the kinds of leadership things I think we can do to improve our companies and help become more agile.
So you talk about efficiency, alignment, and rigor. What do you mean by rigor?
Rigor to me is making good decisions. So if you are efficient and you're not rigorous, you're going to get the wrong things done quickly, right? Or if you're aligned and you're not rigorous, again, you're going to get the wrong things done altogether. So rigor to me is making sure you look at options, making sure you define the problem or the opportunity well, that you look at options, you look at data about the options, you get everyone's involvement who needs to be involved, and you make good decisions.
So how is it that one can kind of develop their rigor and kind of be a little bit more, I don't want to say aligned because you use that word somewhere else, but more in tune with the things that they're supposed to be doing, making sure they're doing the right thing?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One of the concepts that I'm real high on is what I call frameworks.
Yeah.
And a framework is a tool or a cultural practice that helps with leadership. And around rigor, actually, these frameworks tend to support rigor, alignment, and efficiency. But around rigor, you have a couple ones that I'm a big fan of. So out of Toyota Lean came a framework called the A3, which is simply a one-page document that describes the problem, lays out the options, gives the data, has a recommendation, and next steps. Pretty straightforward. Another thing like that is the Amazon approach, which is they go into meetings and you have to have a 2 to 6 page memo describing the topic, and they banned PowerPoints. I really like that as well. I haven't had a chance to work in that environment, but I think I'd like it. And then, so that's kind of the framework idea. And then on the behavior side, I'll give you an example that that I recently did, which was we were doing a design for an interface from one system to another, and the engineer did an A3 on it, which I thought was great, and described how he wanted to do it, but he didn't provide any options. And so as a leader, I looked at it, and I wasn't sure if that was the right way to do it because I couldn't tell. Right? What else did you think about? So I said, go back, give me a couple options, right? How else could we do this? And tell me why this is the right way. So that kind of leadership, which is saying, tell me your thinking, give me your data, and do it in a nice way, is important as well.
No, I like that idea. I think whenever someone comes to me with multiple options, it does a couple of things. One, it gives me or my team or whoever's in the meeting the feeling of input, like they're putting something into this. They're actually making a decision. They're not just going with whatever someone else said. So they have buy-in into it. They kind of feel like it's partly their fault if it doesn't go well, so they're gonna work harder for it. But also it gives me the idea and the concept that you've thought about this. You put a lot of thought into it. It wasn't the first thing that came to mind. You actually went through the steps of critical thinking to figure out, is this the best option?
Yeah, and then it helps everyone else learn.
Yes.
So the rest of the team now understands what kinds of options to think through. It demonstrates how to go about this. It's kind of a virtuous circle.
So when you talk about frameworks, you said the A3 and the Amazon approach. When I'm thinking about the Amazon approach, not having PowerPoints at meetings, I think that's great. What do you feel about meetings that don't have an agenda? Because sometimes I get invited to meetings and I have no idea why I'm going. And you talk a lot about meetings and the importance of meetings and how good they are. What do you think about things like that, and how can we kind of develop a culture of improving that?
Yeah, so my group is known for what I call extraordinarily well-prepared and led meetings. I need a shorter name for that. And I really like these because if you think about the work we do, which is, in some of my projects, I have over 100 people on the same program. How do you get 100 people all aligned around the right thing and do it efficiently? And to me, a great meeting is a real leverage point. It's a key framework. But if you don't do it well, all you do is waste everyone's time. So we spend a lot of time teaching people how to do a good meeting. So how to do a great agenda, how to get everyone to do the work, what kind of activities to do at meetings so that people are working together and thinking in a way that's valuable and not just split up and everyone think of what to do and then tell us, something much more specific. So my team has been trained that when they go into a meeting and there's no agenda and they don't know what's going on, they wind up being a little disruptive, right? Which is to say, what are you trying to accomplish? Now, how are we going to get there from here? And that's the right kind of behavior. A bad meeting just wastes people time, and that's a violation of efficiency. And the first rule of lean is respect for the individual, and it's just disrespectful to go into a meeting without the proper preparation and the proper process in the meeting.
Yeah, and that's one thing I really liked about your book is on the sidebar you have all these meeting tips and things that kind of give you some help when you're running a meeting, planning a meeting, setting up a meeting, of just actionable tips that leaders can do or anybody can do that's having a meeting that are, I think I really appreciated that.
Good. I'm glad you found that useful. I mean, people kind of make fun of me sometimes. Like when I first came to U.S. Bank, I had a really big project. And they weren't used to having big meetings, and certainly not big, good meetings, and they weren't used to traveling for meetings. But it was a really urgent thing, and I wound up having the kickoff meeting. I had 120 people there, and it was intensely prepared. And people walked away from it saying it was the best meeting they'd ever been in, and it kicked off the project in just the right way. But people still make fun of me for my 120-person meeting, and they also make fun of me for my meetings to prepare for meetings. But I think that's really helpful as a leader to really respect people's time and energy, and when they come to a meeting, have it be really valuable.
Yes, I think that two real keys you said right there: respect people's time and make sure the meeting is valuable. I came from a company before where meetings were just something we always did. So people just always had meetings, and even if the meeting was pointless, they continued to have the meeting on the calendar. And yes. I've spoken on the podcast about my disdain for some meetings like that in the past. And even I went to a point where I was trying to optimize my time, and probably 30% of my reoccurring meetings, I just stopped going. I canceled them, and I sent a nice polite email that said, hey, if you really need me here, I'll be here. Otherwise, if you can just send me meeting minutes, and I can respond with any questions you have or anything you need from me, that'd be appreciative. And I never got a meeting minute. I never got anything except for, no, that's fine, you're not needed. Well, if you would have told me that a year ago, I could have saved even more time,
Right. But, yeah, a couple other things in the meeting. So there was one meeting that I was invited to, which was about an important project, and it was a weekly status meeting. And they had 165 people on the invitation. That's not right. But crazy. The other kind of meeting I think is really important as well is the informal meeting. So let's take a case where you have a project team or a couple of project teams working on something. Well, they all report up to managers. Okay, so that we still have a formal management hierarchy. And people get confused around what's our role now as managers. But one of the things we do is create informal connections with the managers of other people on our teams. And those kind of meetings are more like, let's have coffee together and talk about how our team is doing. Mm-hmm. What are you hearing from your folks? What can we do to help? Do they have the right people? Is there a performance problem on the team? Is your team involved in the right way? Are you paying enough attention to it? So that kind of informal coffee meeting or beer meeting, whatever it might be, is also really important. And in that meeting, you're not going to have an agenda formally or anything like that. You just want to listen and establish that personal relationship, so that relationship is there so you can help your team.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's one thing that gets overlooked a lot, is those relationships that need to be built in an informal setting, so that people are comfortable talking and being open with it, and so that you're aware, and to build that, I guess you call it social capital, so that you can use it if you ever need it, but that you kind of have an ally there that you can kind of trust and understand.
Yeah, there's a project that we've been on for a couple of years working with a fintech. It's been really successful. One of the reasons for the success was that the president of the company and I had a half an hour call every Friday. And we probably kept it half the time because both of us were busy. Mm-hmm. But it was just a call to chat with whatever was on our mind or what each of us were hearing from our teams. And we didn't publicize this meeting. I mean, my team knew I did it because they'd feed me things that they wanted me to talk about, and so did his. But it was just an informal connection. And that informal connection was really important because we had a lot of hard times and a lot of great opportunities. And that created a foundation for us to work together more effectively. So That's the kind of thing that... It's an important kind of a meeting. It's not the kind of great preparation meeting, but it's a human relationship thing, which is quite important.
Yeah, absolutely. I do that here in my full-time job where I run our technology department. I'll go around and just on a weekly basis, it's probably figured out by most people, but I have a routine where I'll spend an hour or so having an informal meeting with the executive assistant to our CEO just to know what's really going on behind the scenes sometimes, and then I'll do the same thing with our CFO and with the other folks just to to build that relationship, understand what's going on, see if there's opportunities where technology can come in and help, that people don't think about technology as being an opportunity there. But we have lots of things that we can help with that we just don't know about because people don't necessarily communicate them in a formal way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a lean concept called management by walking around, where you actually, or go see, they call it Gembo walks, which I really like again, right? And I mean, I do that with my Scrum teams a little less now than I used to because I kind of got promoted too high. And I really encourage my team members to do that, which is go to your team Scrum meetings or your project team meetings, ignore the chicken pig rule, and if they want to talk to you, talk to them. I think that connection between management knowing what's going on and knowing how we can help our teams is critical.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think being present is important. So why did you write these books on agility, and especially this one, people over process?
Yeah. I'll give you the abbreviated story. I worked at Wells Fargo when we were doing a very big project, and it failed miserably. And this was around 2006 and 2007. And my team had already become pretty agile. I mean, it was agile to start with, and then we adopted Scrum and other techniques. And we brought that to the table. And there was 4 major teams, and my team did really well, and the other ones failed. And I think they failed because even though they had great managers who knew the business, plenty of funds, nothing wrong with the technology, they tried to do a big waterfall project. And doing a big waterfall project, if you're doing an enormous mortgage origination build, I just don't think it has any chance of success. So out of that, I wound up writing my first book, which was about what is lean and agile software and why do we have to do it. And then a couple years later, as I saw people starting to implement agile, I thought I had something to add about different ways of how to change your organization to do that. And I called that either driving people or people driven, and talked about which way you do it. And those are both kind of fun. And then this one was a reaction to people mistaking Scrum for Agile in a very, in the simplest form, that people were prescribing process and ignoring the first principle. So then the question is, what does it mean to focus on people? And I had learned this leadership model called facilitative leadership several years ago and had implemented it in my team for 10 years and saw such great results. I wanted to share that with people.
So what is facilitative leadership? And what makes that different than other leadership models that are out there?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. Well, I think that it has to do with the nature of large-scale creative software development. What we're trying to do here, I don't think has been done before in human history, which is you take 100 or more people, which is most of my projects, 'cause they're pretty big, and they're not all on one Scrum team, but 100 or more people. You have ideas of what's needed, and you turn those ideas into instructions in software, and then that software has to run. So essentially you have a highly intellectual process of 100 or more people, and the resulting intellectual results has to work. So if you compare it to things we've done in the past with large numbers of people working together, you have armies which have to work together, but that's more of a go do this. And you also have things like building pyramids, which are very creative, but they're design and do things. It's not like a lot of creativity of each person involved, and you can actually watch and see what's happening, which you can't in software. So that nature means you have to lead differently. You have to enable everyone to have the right information, enable input, make good decisions, get everyone aligned, and do it efficiently. And so that's the facilitative leadership idea: rigor, alignment, and efficiency. And the mechanism that you make that work with is frameworks and, of course, leadership behavior.
So what's the best way that let's say a small or medium-sized software development team or IT engineering team could kind of switch their processes to kind of follow some of this?
Yeah, certainly everyone should buy and read my book.
That's number one, right?
No, I think it does start with the right leadership leadership mindset in terms of valuing the people and their autonomy and their ability not to just follow the process.
Yeah. I think autonomy is so important because we think we're doing the right thing by putting up all these guardrails and trying to make things easier for people, but we're just restricting their creativity. We're restricting their ability to think for themselves and to come up with solutions that are probably better than what we would come up with anyway.
Yeah, I was in a meeting when we were first starting to implement broad scale Agile at the bank, and there was a discussion of should we have standardized sprint periods, like should it be 2 weeks or 3 weeks? And my question back was, okay, so let's say we have a project team and they're on a 2-week sprint schedule and they do their retrospective and they think they should be on a 3-week sprint schedule. Does that mean everyone in the whole bank has to change to 3 weeks, or can this team change?
What was the answer?
And so I think if you over-prescribe, you under-optimize each team. And so you have to be really careful of where do teams have to have commonality and where can teams be different. And then what's your communication between the teams, and how do they coordinate where they have to do a release together, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think each team having their own ability to decide and come together is what agility is all about. And I've worked at companies where we said, okay, for this project team is going to be Scrum, this project team is going to be Kanban, and we're going to do things differently. But at the end of the day, we're going to be agile. We're going to do the best job we can, and it's going to be up to that project team to make their own decisions of what's best for them in achieving the goal of the business.
Yeah, and I think that's the most valuable way of doing it. The agile principles apply here. One of them is the best. What is it? The best architectures and software come from self-organizing teams. I think that there's a lot of truth to that. That doesn't mean as managers we shouldn't pay attention or help or watch or make sure they interact effectively. But that freedom, if you have the right people on the team and they have the right leadership skills, they're going to make better decisions than their managers are going to do, or that any specific Scrum method could do.
Yeah. So you hit on one thing that it's kind of been one thing that's a trouble that I fell into as well. When you try to give people the freedom, sometimes you give too much, or you kind of feel like I no longer am responsible for this because I've given you the freedom to choose that. But as a leader, we're still responsible.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So how is it that we can balance that?
That's a great question. I give an example in the book, actually the main story in the book. The book's not just, here's the leadership theory. There's actually a story of a bank called Pacifica Bank, which is an imaginary bank, but it draws on some of the experiences I've seen. The initial problem is they have an agile coach and they're trying to do their release plan, and they're trying to allocate stories to sprints, and they can't figure out how that can work for this particular project. And the reason why is because the project's just too complicated to work with that simple a model. And their manager notices this and says, where are you going with this? And realizes they don't know where they're going and calls in some help. So that's one of the responsibilities of organizational management, is to have enough knowledge to know when teams are off track and to figure out how to help them.
Yeah, and I think going back to the earlier things we were talking about, they have to be present and having these conversations, these informal meetings, to know if people are really off track. Because people don't want to come out and say, "Hey, I need help here." Nobody likes to ask for help.
Right. Well, the other thing that happens is, I don't know if it's true in all organizations, but most organizations, when you undertake something that's using a bunch of resources, you're promising to deliver something.
Yes.
And one of my favorite sayings is, "Agile is not an excuse not to plan." So I like to see each project, whether it's a release or a new product or a new system or whatever, they have a goal of when they want to release with what, how much it's going to cost, and some set of milestones along the way, and God forbid, status reporting, so that we know it's visible where they are. And I know that some people don't believe in status reporting and don't believe in those kind of stronger plans, but as a business leader, you're making a decision to invest a lot of money in something. What is it, and how do you know if you're on track? I still think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually talking to a project manager not too long ago, and they were talking about how they hired. I guess they run a PMO, and they hired some project managers. And they said, "Well, where's your status report of this project?" It's like, "Oh, I thought we were an agile shop. We didn't think we did status reports." And she's like, "Yeah, we do status reports because that's important."
Yeah, we have groups that are like what we call run teams, where it's a mature system that's been in production for a while, and they basically just do Kanban. I mean, it's not, they don't call it that, but that's what they do.
More
they just
of a
take the
maintenance
next thing that the business finds important, and their status reports are kind of boring. It's like, here's what we've gotten done, here's the next thing, here's what we learned in the last retrospective, and so probably no one reads that except for their direct business partners. But then we have things like we're implementing a whole new system for how we do business banking, and that status report's pretty important and interesting. So it's contextually important of, what are you trying to do and how do you have to communicate it.
So one question I like to ask is, what is one of the biggest mistakes that people make trying to implement something like this, or just in technology management in general?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake that I've seen, and I've now been doing this for 35 years. Starting with mainframe through the invention of the PC, the network, etc. I think it's a misunderstanding of the nature of the work. So it's kind of a conceptual thing. This is where people think that it's a predictable thing that I can kind of plan the work and work the plan, right? Or is it a creative thing where I need to manage this in a completely different way? And I think that the Agile Manifesto really talked about techniques that would work in either of those situations, but where we try to do a really detailed upfront plan and try to follow it, where the nature of the work is more exploratory and creative, we get a mess, we get a mismatch, we get a big failure. And on the other hand, where it is repeatable, subject to continuous improvement process, and we treat it as if it's not, then we under-optimize and do a terrible job. So to me, that's the primary mistake people make, and that is one of the primary obligations of good technology leadership. Standardize and continuously improve those things that can be, but give freedom and emphasize leadership where it's a creative endeavor.
Yeah, and honestly, coming from a software development background, I think most software development is creative because you're trying to create solutions to problems and solve things. There is, like some of those aspects where it is a process, but there's definitely a lot of creativity that comes into creating new software for sure.
There is, and for everyone out there who's tried to stabilize velocity on your team and points, right, you can, especially when you first start a project, it bounces all over the place.
Yeah,
right?
It looks like a EKG monitor.
It's because the basic Scrum model is I can do an estimate that's close enough, it'll be close enough, and we'll keep going. It's a flow and a manufacturing process, but it's a mismatch for a lot of the things we do.
What I found I was leading a web and mobile development team, and we switched from waterfall to Scrum. This was many years ago, and when we made that shift, our velocity was up and down, up and down, up and down, and it was mostly because I found out that my team was very optimistic. Is that common in software developers? I
think it is. People are always optimistic about what they can deliver. I've never seen a project get done sooner than people said it was going to get done, and this is in 25 or 30 years.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know that.
One thing I'd say is, I don't want it to come across like I'm anti-Scrum. Most of my teams are Scrum. I like Scrum. It delivers a lot of great things. It delivers the working together every day. It delivers the test as soon as you can. Deliver one piece at a time. Those are all things I really love about it. So my argument isn't people shouldn't do Scrum. My argument is that people should lead through Scrum.
Yeah, I think you got to find out what works for your team. Everybody's different, and I was just noticing. I was getting ready to talk about some of the other folks we've had on the show, and it seems like a lot of the great Agile authors' names are Michael or Mike. We had Mike Burrows on and Mike Cohn on, and now you. And and one of the things they all say is, you got to pick the framework and the methodology that works for your team and for your people.
Yes.
So how can people find out more about People Over Process, and where can they pick up the book and find out more about you and maybe connect?
Yeah, my website is called thetales.agility.com. It's the 3 books together. It's a trilogy. You don't have to read all 3 of them. I'd say start with the last one. I like that one the best. And then that would be the easiest place to get information about it.
Okay, and I'm going to link all that up in the show notes at ageekleader.com so people can go to Tales of Agility there. I'll also link to the book, and you can see that where we have all of our author books at guest from ageekleader.com. We'll be right there. And Michael, any last thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
I think that as I talk to people about their careers, so one of the questions I get asked a lot is, what's your career advice? And I'll just share that with people since your audience is mostly, a lot of people earlier in their careers, which is think about what is valuable to the market, right? So, a lot of us who've been in the business for a long time, you get your jobs eliminated, and then where do you go? So I tell people, think about what's valuable in the market. Certainly your technical skills are really important, but develop your leadership skills as well. You don't have to be a formal team lead or a manager to be a great leader. I think if you focus on these concepts of making good decisions, how do you get people aligned together, how do you do that in an efficient way, that's going to multiply your effectiveness and help your career.
Excellent. I couldn't agree with more. I think leadership is one of the areas that is extremely important when it comes to technology, especially, but anywhere really in business.
It is. So.
Well, Michael, thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. And again, check out People Over Processes. You can find that at ageekleader.com. We'll link to it. And have a great weekend.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me on.
If you guys enjoyed that episode, please head over to iTunes and leave me a rating and a review. I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, if you want to pick up Michael's book, you can do that at ageekleader.com. Just click on the book from our guest, and you'll find a link to his book there. You can also find it on Amazon or anywhere else where books are sold, and definitely check that out. And special thanks to Splashtop for sponsoring this episode. And if you're looking for a new or better value for remote computer access solution, see for yourself why so many people are leaving other tools like LogMeIn or TeamViewer and switching to Splashtop. It's fast, secure, competitively priced, and to learn more and start a free trial plus an exclusive 20% discount for your first year, visit ageekleader.com/splashtop. Again, that's ageekleader.com/SPLASHTOP, Splashtop.